The sound of a chain snapping tight against wood woke me at 6 in the morning. I lay there for maybe 2 seconds, thinking it was a dream. Then the diesel engine revved, and I heard the crack. Deep, structural, the kind of sound a tree makes right before it falls. I was at the window before the second crack came. A backhoe had its bucket arm hooked to the corner post of my fence, the one my father set into the ground the summer of 1987, the last thing we ever built together. The chain was pulled so tight it was humming. I could hear it through the glass. Then it slipped. The chain snapped back and whipped across the cab, missing the operator's windshield by inches. He ducked. The engine kept running. Nobody stopped. By the time I got to the porch, 60 feet of hand-split cedar was being dragged across my front yard like brush. The backhoe's tracks had torn into the wet ground near the creek embankment, and I could see the seasonal drainage lines starting to pool where the soil had been displaced. My neighbor, Dave Hendricks, was standing at the edge of his driveway with his phone up, recording. And Linda Dressler, HOA president, 3-year resident, woman who had never swung a hammer in her life, was standing at the edge of my property in a pressed blazer, sipping coffee, watching my family's legacy get ripped out of the earth. She looked up at my window. She smiled. She had no idea what would happen when the title company ran my name. A single flag in those federal records would cost her everything: her position, her money, her professional license, and every secret she'd been hiding since North Carolina. You're going to want to hear every word of what happened next. I need to take you back, though, before the backhoe, before Linda, before any of this. The property sits on 2 1/4 acres at the end of Macklin Road in Jessup County, Virginia. Rolling land, mostly. A seasonal creek cuts through the back third, fed by a natural spring that's been running since before anyone kept records. Virginia red clay under everything, which means when it rains, the whole world smells like iron and wet stone. My father bought the parcel in 1979 for $22,000, which was everything he had saved from 11 years as a land surveyor for the Army Corps of Engineers. He built the house himself. I don't mean he hired somebody and watched. I mean he poured the footings with a rented mixer, framed the walls with lumber he milled from trees he dropped on the back acre. The man could look at a piece of ground and tell you where water would sit in 50 years. That's what the Corps trained him to do. Read the land, understand drainage, elevation, subsurface flow. He carried a transit level the way other men carried a wallet.
When I was 12, we built the fence together. That was 1987. He laid out the line using his old survey equipment, set the corner posts with concrete he mixed by hand in a wheelbarrow. Each post was hand-split Shenandoah cedar, not milled, not bought from a yard. We drove up to a mill outside Staunton and selected the logs ourselves. I can still smell the inside of that truck on the drive back. Cedar shavings and my father's thermos coffee, and the vinyl of the bench seat warm from the sun. The fence ran 412 feet along the front and east property lines. Post and rail, 3 rails high, with mortise and tenon joints he cut himself. No nails on the joints. He said nails made wood fight itself. You let the wood hold the wood, he told me, and it'll outlast you and me both. He was right. That fence stood for 36 years. Every morning I'd walk the fence line with my coffee. 6:15, rain or shine. I'd check for frost heave in winter, look for rot, tighten a rail if one had worked loose. It took about 20 minutes. My wife used to watch me from the kitchen window. After she passed 4 years ago now, I kept the routine. Maybe I needed it more then. Some mornings, the only thing holding me together was the sound of my boots on that gravel path and the way the creek sounded through the trees when the air was still. The whole property, house, outbuildings, 2 acres of cleared land, the timber on the back lot, appraised at $485,000 in 2021. Not because I improved it for resale, because it was built right by a man who understood what right meant. I retired to that property 8 years ago, moved back from Northern Virginia, where I'd spent 26 years working as a federal land surveyor and boundary compliance specialist for the Department of the Interior. Same work my father did, different uniform. I certified survey plats on federal land, national forests, military installations, Bureau of Land Management holdings. When there was a boundary dispute involving federal property, my office got the call. But I didn't talk about that much. Out here, I was just Ray Macklin's son, the quiet guy at the end of the road who walked his fence line every morning. That was enough for me. Something changed the morning she knocked on my door. You could hear her coming before you saw her, the click of designer heels on asphalt, the rustle of that clipboard she carried like a weapon, and the perfume, something floral and expensive that didn't belong on a gravel road in Jessup County. It arrived about 30 seconds before she did, every time. My property predated the HOA by decades. My father's land was there before Ridgecrest Estates existed. When the developer platted the subdivision in 1996, my parcel was grandfathered in. We shared a road, shared a general address, but I was never technically subject to their covenants. My father made sure of that. He'd read the annexation language, understood what it meant, and filed the appropriate boundary documentation with the county. Linda either didn't know that or didn't care. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday in March, certified mail. It informed me that my fence was non-compliant with Ridgecrest community aesthetic standards and gave me 30 days to replace it with an approved design. The approved designs were all vinyl, white or beige. I read the letter twice, folded it, put it in a drawer. The second letter came 2 weeks later, a fine, $250 for ongoing non-compliance, a photograph of my fence stapled to the back, described as deteriorated timber fencing inconsistent with neighborhood visual standards. I paid the fine. I know that sounds wrong, but I've spent a career dealing with jurisdictional disputes. You don't win them by arguing with the first letter. You win them by documenting the pattern. And here's something most people don't know. If someone ever claims authority over your property through an HOA, the first thing you check is the original covenant filing. You look for annexation language. You look for the legal description of covered parcels. If your property isn't named in the original filing, everything they send you is just expensive stationery. I didn't tell Linda that. Not yet. The third contact wasn't a letter. Linda herself showed up on a Saturday morning while I was walking the fence line. Clipboard, tape measure. She told me she was conducting a property assessment. She measured my fence posts, photographed my mailbox, told me my gravel driveway wasn't consistent with community standards. I stood there with my coffee and listened. That perfume was stronger up close, sweet and chemical, like something designed in a laboratory to smell like confidence. When she was done, I said thank you and went back inside. At the next HOA meeting, which I attended from the back row, she mentioned my property by address, said it was bringing down property values. She used the phrase visual blight. 3 people turned around to look at me. I didn't say anything. I took notes. Date, time, exact quote, names of witnesses. The same way I documented boundary discrepancies on federal land for 26 years.
The fourth incident was the inspection notice. She'd convinced a county code enforcement officer to schedule an inspection of my structures. Friday notice, Monday inspection. That bothered me. Not because I was worried about passing. It bothered me because I knew what it meant. She wasn't annoyed anymore. She was organizing, using institutional authority as a personal weapon. But what I hadn't done yet was look into Linda herself. That was about to change, because Dave Hendricks knocked on my door that Sunday evening and told me something that made my coffee down. Dave didn't come inside.
He stood on my porch with his hands in his jacket pockets and spoke quietly, like he was worried someone would hear. "You need to look at where the money's going," he said. "The special assessments, the road maintenance fund, none of it adds up." Dave had been asking questions at meetings for months. Where did the $40,000 road resurfacing budget go when the roads were never resurfaced? Why was the landscaping contract twice what neighboring HOAs paid? Linda shut him down every time, called his questions disruptive. And here's the part Dave told me that made my stomach drop. 2 days after he'd asked about the road maintenance fund at a public meeting, his wife received a certified letter, violation notice. Their garden border was 3 inches too high, fine of $400. Pattern recognition, that's what my father called it. When violations show up right after questions get asked, the violations aren't about compliance, they're about control. So I started looking. Here's the thing about spending 26 years in federal boundary work. You learn how to read public records the way a mechanic reads engine noise. You hear what's missing. First, I pulled the HOA's financial filings from the county recorder's office. Ridgecrest's filings were current, which surprised me until I compared them to the actual bank records Dave had obtained through a formal homeowner request. The filings showed $1.2 million in reserves. The bank statements showed $338,000, $862,000 missing. That was Monday. By Wednesday, I'd traced the landscaping contract. The company listed, Green Valley Property Services, was registered to a P.O. box in Ashburn. Its registered agent was a woman named Linda Marsh. Linda Dressler's maiden name was Marsh. She was paying HOA funds to a company she controlled. Over 3 years, those payments totaled $347,000 for services that were either never performed or performed by a different company at a fraction of the cost.
On Thursday, I found the second layer. The Road Maintenance Fund had disbursed $215,000 to Blue Ridge Infrastructure, LLC. That company had been dissolved 18 months before the payments were issued. The checks were deposited into an account at a regional bank in Roanoke. Account holder, Gerald Dressler, Linda's ex-husband. Friday was when it got worse. I called a contact at the Wake County Clerk's office in North Carolina. Civil actions involving Linda Marsh or Linda Dressler. There were 2. Both fraud complaints from HOAs in the Raleigh suburbs. One involved $190,000 from a recreation fund. The other, falsified vendor contracts totaling $140,000. Both settled before trial, sealed terms. She left the state within 6 months each time. This wasn't someone who made a mistake. This was a pattern. But here's the layer that changed everything. I pulled her financial records that were publicly available through the county. Linda owed $67,000 in back property taxes across 2 parcels. She carried 3 active liens. Her mortgage, taken out just 2 years ago, was for 94% of her home's value. And her ex-husband, Gerald, the one receiving those Blue Ridge payments, had filed for bankruptcy in Roanoke 8 months earlier. She wasn't stealing because she felt entitled to. She was stealing because she was drowning. The expensive blazers, the designer heels clicking on the asphalt, that perfume that arrived 30 seconds before she did, all of it was a costume. Underneath was a woman running the same scheme for the 3rd time because it was the only thing she knew how to do. Ridgecrest was her 3rd operation, and every dollar she took from those 142 homeowners went straight into keeping up appearances that were already collapsing. I put the documents in a binder, filed it next to my father's original survey plat. Then I made coffee and waited, because she wasn't done yet. The code enforcement inspection came Monday morning. Patrick, county vest, clipboard. He walked the property for 40 minutes. I walked with him. "Mr. Macklin, I don't have a single violation to cite here," he said. "Honestly, this is one of the best maintained properties I've seen in this district." I photographed his report when it was filed. Clean bill. Added it to the binder. Linda's response came within the week. A new letter threatening a lien for $4,800 in accumulated fines.
But this time, the consequences went beyond paper. My insurance company sent a notice 3 days later. They were reviewing my homeowner's coverage because of a reported easement encumbrance. Linda's fabricated lien had triggered an automated flag in their system.
Then the bank called. I'd been in a routine refinance to lock in a lower rate. The loan officer told me the title search had flagged the lien. Application paused. And the county assessor's office sent a letter, property boundary reassessment based on new easement documentation. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at those 3 letters spread out in front of me: insurance, mortgage, taxes. She was attacking the 3 pillars that hold up any homeowner's financial life, and she was doing it with a single forged document. My daughter, Sarah, she lives in Richmond, called that evening. "Dad, is everything okay with the house? I got a call from the insurance company asking me to verify some information as your emergency contact." I told her it was fine, that I was handling it. After I hung up, I sat in the dark kitchen for a while. The creak was the only sound. I thought about my wife, how she would have known what to say, how she would have looked at those 3 letters and said something quiet and sharp that would have made me laugh. But she wasn't here, and the house she loved was being attacked by a woman who'd never built anything in her life. The lien cited Ridgecrest HOA Bylaw 11.3, structural modifications inconsistent with community standards. My fence, 36 years old, was now classified as a structural modification. I pulled the original covenant from 1996. Bylaw 11.3 had been amended. The original version applied only to structures built after the founding date. The current version removed that limitation. Filed 14 months ago, signed by 3 board members, notarized by a notary in Roanoke. I recognized the notary's name: Gerald Dressler. Her bankrupt ex-husband was notarizing fraudulent amendments for her. I photographed both versions, added them to the binder. A week later, a certified letter from an attorney in Charlottesville, foreclosure proceedings. The total had grown to $11,200. That night, I sat on the porch for a long time. The creak was loud. I'll be honest, there were about 30 minutes where I wondered if this was going to cost me the house. Not because she was right, but because the legal system moves slowly, and people like Linda know how to use that slowness as a weapon. Then I looked at the corner post, the one my father set, still standing. I called Bill Tackett, property attorney in Roanoke. I'd worked with him on a federal boundary case 12 years earlier. Told him everything. "Ray," he said, "send me everything." I sat at his office the next morning for 3 hours. When we were done, he looked at me over his reading glasses. "She's not just exposed, she's insolvent, and she doesn't know it yet." That was the first time I'd smiled in 2 months. The escalation didn't slow down.
Linda called an emergency meeting, put my address on the screen, photographs of my fence, my driveway, my workshop, moved to authorize corrective action on non-compliant structures. The vote passed. Dave and 2 others voted against it. Everyone else went along. Some of them looked at the floor when they raised their hands. 3 days later, I found orange spray paint on my fence rails. Not graffiti, survey markings. Someone had marked my fence line as though preparing for demolition. I photographed every mark, 14 of them. That evening, I borrowed a GPS unit from a surveyor friend and walked the fence line myself. Coordinate readings at every orange mark, overlaid against the county's digital parcel map. Not a single mark fell within any recorded easement, not one. I knew exactly what that meant. Mark a private structure as though it's within a utility easement, then claim authority to remove it. Forgery of survey markings, Class 1 misdemeanor in Virginia.
The county surveyor, Patel, came out 2 days later, confirmed the markings were fraudulent. No utility easement within 40 feet of my fence. I added her formal finding to the binder. Then came the morning they sent the crew. 6 a.m., diesel engine, backhoe hooked to my corner post, Linda on the sidewalk with her attorney. I walked outside in my robe and boots, didn't shout, stood on my porch and took photographs, 47 photographs in 9 minutes. The hydraulic arm hissed each time it repositioned. I could smell the wet clay where the tracks had torn the ground near the creek bank. Splinters of cedar scattered across the lawn, pale and raw against dark soil. Deputy Morrison arrived in 14 minutes, backhoe still running. I showed him the surveyor's finding, the HOA's authorization citing a non-existent easement, the GPS overlay, Dave's phone footage. "Ma'am, do you have a valid easement document for this work?" She handed him a piece of paper. He read it. I watched his face change. "Ma'am, this easement references a plat number that doesn't exist in the county system. I'm going to need you to stop work immediately." Her attorney walked to her car without a word. Linda stood on the sidewalk for 10 minutes, then left. That perfume lingered on the morning air for another 5 minutes after she was gone. I walked the damage. 60 feet of my father's fence. Corner post snapped at the base. Cedar rails split where the chain had cinched them. I could see the individual fibers where the wood had torn apart, still pale and fragrant inside after 36 years. I picked up a piece of the rail, held it, smelled the cedar, like opening a closet that hasn't been touched in years. 2 days later, the demolition contractor's foreman called, didn't give his name, just said, "Look, we were told this was a standard easement clearance. We were told to pull it fast and get out. Nobody showed us a real work order. She paid cash and said the county had signed off."
Virginia is a one-party consent state. I recorded the call. Now here's where my training took over. 26 years of boundary compliance work taught me something most people never learn. When someone forges a survey document, they almost always make one specific mistake. They use the format they've seen most recently, not the format that was current when the document was supposedly created. Linda's fabricated easement referenced a plat format that Virginia discontinued in 2004. The document was supposedly filed in 1998. Anyone with basic survey training would have spotted it immediately. But Linda didn't have survey training. She had a photocopier and her ex-husband's notary stamp. I pulled my father's old survey transit from the workshop, a wild T2, Swiss-made. I hadn't used it in years, but I set it up on the property line and ran my own boundary verification. Every measurement matched my father's original plat to within a quarter inch. 36 years later, his work was still perfect. I created a boundary overlay document. My father's 1979 survey on one layer, the 1996 subdivision plat on the second layer, Linda's fabricated easement on the third. When you stacked them, the fraud was visible to anyone with eyes. The easement crossed property lines that didn't exist, referenced monuments that were never set, and claimed authority from a plat number that the county had never issued. I built a presentation, clean, methodical, the same format I'd used for federal boundary dispute hearings. Every slide told one fact. Every fact was sourced to a public record. No opinions, no accusations, just geometry and documents. I put it in the binder. The binder was getting heavy. She thought she'd broken something. I picked up the phone, called Bill Tackett, said 5 words. "It's time. Call the office." Here's what Linda Dressler didn't know. When I said I was a federal surveyor, I don't mean I held a tape measure on road projects. I was a GS-13 boundary compliance specialist with the Bureau of Land Management.
For 26 years, I certified the legal boundaries of federal property. When boundary fraud occurred, my office investigated. I wrote the reports that became the basis for federal referrals. I held an active federal surveyor's license, certified for expert testimony in federal court. Professional relationships with the U.S. Attorney's offices in 3 districts and the Virginia Attorney General's Real Property Fraud Division. My father had the same credentials, Corps of Engineers. He taught me what a fraudulent survey marking looked like. He could spot a fake plat the way a jeweler spots a fake diamond, not by what's there, but by what's missing. When Linda filed her lien, the title company ran a standard background search. My name came back flagged. Not as a criminal.
As a federal credentialed holder, active license, Department of the Interior, boundary compliance. The title company's attorney called Bill that afternoon. "Your client is a federal boundary expert," he said, "and they filed a lien based on a fabricated easement against him." Bill said yes. "We're not processing this lien." The county clerk's office called me the next morning, a woman named Rodriguez in property records. "Mr. Macklin, are you the same boundary compliance specialist who testified in the 2014 federal easement fraud case in the Western District?" I told her I was. "You should know that the easement document filed against your property references a plat format discontinued in 2004. Whoever created it didn't know that. The system itself was rejecting Linda's forgery, not because I asked it to, because the document was that bad. Every moment I'd sat quietly in those meetings, every fine I'd paid without argument, every morning I walked the fence line and said nothing. It wasn't passivity, it was documentation. I was building the record the same way I'd built 100 federal boundary cases, methodically, precisely, and with the patience of a man who knows exactly how the system works because he helped build it. I poured a cup of coffee, stood on the porch, looked at the gap where my fence used to be. I smiled. First time in months. The next morning I made 3 phone calls. First was Bill. Civil complaint ready by Thursday. Destruction of property, fraud, filing of false instruments, tortious interference. Second was Janet Chin at the Virginia Attorney General's office, Real Property Fraud Division. I told her everything. She said, "Send me the binder, all of it." Third was the Jessup County Commonwealth Attorney, criminal destruction of property and falsification of survey documentation. I gave them Morrison's incident number. Then I went home, walked what was left of the fence line. The concrete footings were still in the ground, broken. I could see the rebar my father said in 1987, still solid. Thursday morning, clean shirt, courthouse. Bill filed the complaint. Clerk stamped it at 9:14 a.m. 7 days. The following Wednesday, porch, 6:15, coffee. The creek was quiet, no wind, the kind of stillness where you can hear a truck engine from a mile away. I heard the engines at 6:40. First vehicle, unmarked sedan, state plates, 2 investigators from the AG's Real Property Fraud Division. They didn't look hurried. They looked like people going to work. Second, Jessup County Sheriff's Cruiser, Deputy Morrison. Third, Jess Tackett's silver Volvo. He walked to the porch and stood next to me. "You ready?" "I've been ready." At 7:15, they knocked on Linda's door. I watched from 200 yards away as she opened the door in her bathrobe, read the document, and stepped back inside. The door stayed open. 15 minutes later, a forensic accountant arrived with cardboard file boxes, the kind you use when you're seizing records. At 8, Patel set up a transit on the road, formal boundary survey, post by post, monument by monument. By 9, 6 vehicles on the street, no sirens, no lights, no shouting, just people with clipboards doing their jobs. Linda came outside once, stood on her front step and looked down the street at me. Still on my porch, still holding my coffee. I didn't wave, I didn't nod. She went back inside. At 10:30, a criminal summons, 2 counts falsifying survey documentation, 1 count filing a fraudulent lien, 1 count criminal destruction of property. Her hand, I was told later, was shaking. By noon, 4 boxes of financial records, the complete paper trail of $847,000 in misappropriated funds. Morrison was the last to leave. He slowed past my driveway. "Have a good afternoon, Mr. Macklin." "You too, Deputy." I finished my coffee, cold for an hour. I drank it anyway. The special HOA meeting was the following Monday evening. Every seat taken, people standing along the back wall. Someone had set up a projector. I sat in the back row, Bill next to me with the document case. Linda's seat was empty. Her nameplate was still there. Nobody moved it. Bill walked to the front, connected his laptop. First slide. My father's original 1979 survey plat, the recorded boundary, meets and bounds. Second slide. 1996 subdivision overlay. Side by side. This is the original plat. This is the subdivision overlay. They don't intersect. They never have. Mr. Macklin's property has never been part of this HOA. Every fine, every assessment, every lien is legally void. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when 50 people understand something at the same time. Third slide, financial comparison, filings versus bank statements, 4 years of discrepancies. Fourth, Green Valley Property Services, registered agent Linda Marsh. Fifth, Blue Ridge Infrastructure LLC, dissolved 18 months before receiving payments. Sixth, Linda's personal financial records, back taxes, liens, the bankruptcy filing from her ex-husband who was notarizing her forged documents. The fluorescent lights hummed. Someone set down a water bottle, and the sound carried through the whole room. Bill closed his laptop. "Thank you," and sat down. Dave stood up. "I've been asking about the money for 2 years. Now you know why she didn't want anyone asking." A woman 3 rows ahead of me turned around. "She did the same thing to my garden shed. I paid $3,200 for a shed that was up before she moved here."
2 more homeowners spoke. Then 3 more. 8 families total. Same pattern. Fines for pre-existing structures, threats of liens. Every single one targeted someone who'd asked a question or pushed back. The 3 remaining board members resigned, written resignations. They slid the letters across the table like they were relieved. Dave walked me to my truck after. "You knew the whole time, didn't you?" I thought about it. I knew enough to wait. He laughed, shook my hand. I drove home, walked to the gap in my fence, stood there in the dark. The creek was running. That was enough for now. The criminal case took 9 months. Linda pleaded no contest to 2 counts, falsification of survey documentation and filing a fraudulent lien. Destruction of property folded into civil restitution. 18 months supervised probation, 200 hours community service, $47,000 restitution. The AG's financial investigation confirmed the total embezzlement. Green Valley and Blue Ridge both dissolved by court order. Gerald Dressler charged separately, notary fraud and conspiracy, 12 months probation, commission surrendered. Linda's real estate license revoked by the Virginia Real Estate Board. Her broker dropped her the same week. My insurance reinstated within 2 weeks. Refinance went through at the original rate. County assessor withdrew their reassessment and sent a letter that amounted to an apology without using the word. The civil suit settled in February. Confidential terms, but the number was fair, more than fair. The 8 other families who came forward at the meeting filed a joint civil action. Total recovery across all households exceeded $90,000. Most of them got back every dollar Linda had taken. Linda's house went on the market in March, sold in April, below asking.
She moved. I heard North Carolina, then South Carolina. After that, I stopped hearing about her. It was like she evaporated. It took 9 months, but it ended exactly how land records always do, on paper. I rebuilt the fence in April. Took me 3 weekends. I'm slower than I was. My knees complain about post holes now, and my back has opinions about mixing concrete. But I did it myself. Hand-split cedar from the same mill outside Staunton. They remembered my father. The owner's son runs it now. He picked the logs and wouldn't take full price, said any friend of Ray Macklin's got the family rate. Same mortise and tenon joints, no nails. You let the wood hold the wood. The corner post, the one they snapped, I replaced with a piece of cedar I'd been curing in the workshop for 6 years. Dense, straight-grained, almost red at the heart. When I set it and tamped the concrete, I stood there with my hand on top of it. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to.
My daughter drove down from Richmond to help with the last section. She held the rails while I cut the joints. She's not a builder, not really, but she's got steady hands and she doesn't complain. We finished the last post just before sunset. I made coffee. We sat on the porch and didn't talk for a while, just listened to the creek. She picked up a piece of scrap cedar from the workbench and turned it over in her hands. "Grandpa would have liked this," she said. "Yeah, he would have." Ridgecrest elected a new board that summer. Dave is treasurer. They published the first transparent budget in the HOA's history. Property values went up 11%. I got cards from neighbors. Simple notes. "Thank you. We should have said something sooner." One woman dropped off a pie. The county designated my property as a local heritage structure. The fence and original house protected from any future HOA action, zoning reclassification, or involuntary demolition. Small plaque on a small post. Means something, though. The Virginia Attorney General's office used my boundary overlay document as a template for a new guidance publication on residential survey fraud detection. They sent me a copy. I didn't frame it, but I put it on the shelf next to my father's transit case. Every morning I walk the fence line. 6:15, coffee in hand. The creek sounds the same as it always did. The cedar smells like cedar. The gravel crunches under my boots the way it crunched when I was 12 and walking beside my father. Some mornings I stop at the corner post and just listen. The wind, the water, the wood settling into itself, the way good wood does. She tried to redraw the lines, but survey markers don't move. People do. Have you ever dealt with someone who thought their title made them untouchable? Tell me your story in the comments. If you're still here, subscribe. Next week, someone discovered they own the one thing their entire HOA couldn't survive without. And when the board tried to seize his grandfather's ranch, they found out exactly what that meant. I'll see you then.